Commence primary ignition.
Hi, I'm Howie Weed. I was the Wampa ice creature in The Empire Strikes Back, and you're watching the Virtual Cantina Network.
Hello, Star Wars fans, and welcome to another episode of the Virtual Cantina Speaker Series. This is Season 3, and this week's episode, we have an amazing guest who I haven't met in person yet, but I would really love to and get to know him a lot better. This week's special guest, is Howie Weed. Hello, Howie. How are you?
Hey, thanks for having me on the show, John. It's a pleasure to talk to you about Star Wars and whatever else you want to talk about.
No, you're most welcome. Thank you for agreeing to talk to us for about an hour today. So just before we get to know Howie a little bit better, I know a lot of you've previously met Howie probably on the Star Wars family weekend that we had. But if you haven't met Howie, I hope the next hour will be enlightening, and you'll hear a lot more about Howie and his work to date. So, quick run through of before we get a quick run through of Howie's bio, I just want to say today's episode and the Speaker Series Season 3 is sponsored by Hyperspace Props. There's a link to the Hyperspace Props website, and right now they have a 10% off code that you can use to purchase anything from their site. So if you're interested in anything from Hyperspace Props, that's the link, and you get a 10% discount. Okay, so before we jump into some questions, get to know Howie a little bit better, I just want to read through a little bit about Howie's bio. It is very extensive and very, very, very cool. So, so Howie is essentially a visual and special effects artist at ILM, and is known for his work on Hollywood films and franchises, notably Jurassic Park, Men in Black, the Star Wars Special Editions, Star Wars The Phantom Menace, and Revenge of the Sith, two of my favorite movies. The whole Pirates of the Caribbean series, movies 1 through 3, again, one of my favorite movie series. Transformers movies, Indiana Jones, particularly The Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, Captain America movies, Avengers, and Black Panther. And I have to really gen up on my Marvel stuff, so I apologize for that. I'm watching way too much Star Wars stuff. Anyway, Howie started his career in the film industry in the 80s with a model making job on the film Gremlins. During the late 80s, Howie worked in creature construction and as a model maker for movies such as Witches of Eastwick, Ghostbusters 2, which is again one of my favorite movies of all time, and the television series Star Trek: The Next Generation. During the early and mid-90s, Howie continued his expertise as a model maker and creature construction on productions such as Star Trek IV, The Undiscovered Country, Fire in the Sky, again, one of my favorite movies, Congo, and Jurassic Park: The Lost World. In 1997, Howie began working on special editions of the Star Wars original trilogy. He was a creature maker for The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi special editions, creating new monsters for both films. Much like his contemporary, Rick Baker, Howie has acted as some of his creations, which is very, very special and very unique. He appeared in The New Hope, the special edition, and he can be seen in the canteen as characters Ketwal and Milas. The Empire Strikes Back special edition, Howie was chosen to be inside his own Wampa ice creature costume to film new scenes. As the Wampa no longer required a tall actor, such as Des Webb, who played the original Wampa, what I call effectively the gory Wampa on the special edition was mainly played by Howie, today's guest. After the release of the special editions, Howie continued work on the Star Wars saga with the Star Wars Episode 1, Phantom Menace, as well as Revenge of the Sith as a construction artist and digital model development artist for ILM. Wow, what an extensive background. What a cool career you've had to date. I hope that was a great bio and a good introduction to your career to date, Howie.
Wow, thank you so much. That was a lot.
Yeah, well, that just shows how much work and wonderful things you've done the movie and television business today. So my first question, okay, which is my question I tend to ask everybody. Okay, so going back to the beginning in your younger days, who or what was your early inspiration to work in model making, creature construction, and special effects?
I was a big fan of just learning about movies in general, and there was a secondhand movie theater right near my house, and so my exposure to like the big movies like Lawrence of Arabia and 2001: A Space Odyssey, those kinds of like, you know, touchstone films, was by seeing them on film in a theater. And so I just sort of fell in love with the movies because arguably everything they showed at this theater was a kind of a masterpiece of its time. So I just thought, this is how movies are. They're just, everything is just so awesome. And ultimately that led to me kind of falling in love with Ray Harryhausen films. And they were the kind of films that were on at the time. There was no such thing as streaming or being able to watch. There was no VCRs or anything. So it had to be something that you could consume on a regular basis. And for me, that was these kind of UHF, VHF channels that would show the Ray Harryhausen films all the time. They had Jason and the Argonauts would be on Sunday morning, and the Sinbad movies would be on, and Mysterious Island, and, you know, all those great films. And I would watch them over and over and over again. And I when I finally got into puppet making on Gremlins, I sort of realized, you know, I think part of why I loved stop motion animation so much is because you could see the whole creature all at the same time, and it could walk around and pretty much do whatever you wanted it to do. I didn't realize the serious limitations that they had at that time, doing rear screen projection and building massive, you know, miniature cities and stuff like that, so they could show the whole thing. But that's kind of where my passion for like visual effects and creature work. And I'd have to say, this is kind of a weird one, the James Bond films at the time had a lot of fantasy elements to them, all his gadgets and gadgets and kind of crazy action scenes. I knew that I was aware that those were visual effects as well. And so I was kind of fascinated with that too.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Do you know, it's so many people in your industry, I've asked that same question, and it's literally, they say they start with Harryhausen, you know. And I remember those movies being a very young boy and watching them, like Jason the Argonauts, and being terrified and thinking that, you know, the capture animation, he was the creatures that they built for those movies, they were very believable. Very believable. But we look back now, they're a little slow, clunky. But I mean, goodness, I was terrified as a young boy. So I can
still
totally understand where you got that
the
inspiration.
presentation, they were so good. Yeah. Like the skeletons coming to life, you know, coming out of the ground. They just took their time and they made it creepy. It was so good.
Yeah. Okay, great. So my next question is, so, you know, you kind of talked about your younger days, the inspiration, what you saw that kind of give you the passion to want to work in, you know, the movie and television industry. So tell us about your early part of your career and how did you actually get started? How did you go from really kind of seeing these things visually and being impacted by them, you know, and then how did that develop into you then getting into the movie and television business?
Well, it's a winding kind of a story because, you know, there's no school for it back then. There's no school for special effects, and there's no way to look it up and like research it because there's no internet. So you could go to the library and you could look things up. Like there's a few books on it. You could try to analyze the films as you watch them and look at magazines and things like that. So ultimately for me, what kind of made the transition happen is that I was wandering around in San Francisco where I grew up, and people would put little signs on telephone poles for like a babysitter or, you know, tear off my number and give me a call. And there was one for, are you interested in making movies and learning how to make movies? We're making a movie called Dracula's Disciple, and we'd love to have you join our team. So I tore off the number. I ended up going to the meetings, and it was kind of a co-op that they had already been making this movie for 5 years and they needed special effects people. So I didn't know anything really all that much about special effects, but I had tools and I had a place to build things in my parents' garage. So I joined their team and I started working with a really great guy. His name was Brent Baker, and he became him and I kind of became this team building like fake heads and blood and making fake blood and reading everything we could about that. And ultimately that connection turned into me actually getting a job on Gremlins. Brent had gotten a job with Chris Walas. And so towards the middle end of the show, he brought me in as like extra help to get the show done.
That's great. Do you know, it's a very similar story to, I was talking to Dawn Dining, who did a lot of work on the Mandalorian television series, Book of Boba Fett. And she said the same thing. We just used to goof around with like bandages and fake blood and, plaster of Paris things and just try and, make things look believable. So that's certainly very, very in line with what Dawn was saying about how she got started from just playing around as a hobby to getting into the industry. So, when I was young, talking about movies that changed your world, changed your perspective, and changed your outlook on things. For me, growing up, it was definitely Jaws. I mean, that changed our lives because nobody ever wanted to go in the sea ever again. Close Encounters was one of the first movies I remember thinking, goodness, are there things out there? Are there aliens? Are there other parts of the universe that we haven't explored? And then Star Wars, right? Okay, so obviously this is the Virtual Cantina Speak series, and it's Star Wars based. So what was your first introduction as a young man to the Star Wars universe? Can you tell us a little bit about that and your early memories?
I'm going to go way back on this one. I was at a science fiction convention in San Francisco, and they had this room that was all black curtained off, and they had a 16mm projector and folding seats, and you could go in there and you could watch like Wizards or something like that. And they had just got the trailer for this movie that was going to come out in like 6 months called Star Wars. And they were showing it every once in a while. And I walked into this dark room and they started the trailer, and I kind of stood and watched the trailer. And it's the one that, villains and hero aliens from 1,000 worlds coming to your galaxy this summer. That one with the R2 that just sort of falls over, and it had that different soundtrack with the kind of wah, 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 wah kind of sound to it. And I thought, what I thought was like, oh, this is some kind of B movie or something. I have no idea what this is, because the art of cutting a trailer back then was not what it is today. They couldn't suck you in the way they do now. And it was very, I don't know, of its time. It was very 70s of a trailer. And so I didn't think about the movie that much after that. But then it became this phenomenon. I didn't rush out to see it on opening day. It was on the cover of Time magazine. There were all these news reporters showing people, winding around the block, waiting for the movie to open. And so I was aware that it was a big deal. And what got me into the theater was about a month into it. I went to a lottery drawing for free tickets to go see Star Wars. And the person who was doing the lottery drawing was little Drew Barrymore from E.T. And it was at a Macy's department store, and she would draw names out of a bowl. And I won some tickets and went to go see the movie at the Coronet Theater in San Francisco. And that's where my kind of, hair got blown back. And I was like, I sort of understood what I was missing. And the interesting thing was I saw it with kind of a loaded deck. Like the audience, everyone else in the theater, I think had seen it 5 times already by the time I was in that same theater seeing it for the first time. So the audience reaction was off the hook. Everyone was cheering at all the big moments, being super into it all the way through. And so that just amplified the experience. And I remember afterwards, one of my best friends had gone with me, and he brought his little brother. And when the lights came up, the movie was over, his little brother burst into tears, and we both turned to him and said, "What's wrong?" And he said, "I don't want it to end."
That's a great memory. It's a great memory. It's interesting. Very quickly growing up in the UK, they only ever really showed like 3 very small trailers, clips, if you could even call them that. It was R2 when he gets zapped and he kind of falls over in the canyon. The escape from Mos Eisley, blasting out of Mos Eisley, and then just the TIE fighter attack. And they were very, very tiny sequences. But the hardest part of growing up in the UK with Star Wars, we had to wait till 1978 before it was actually released. So we had to wait a while. And so the talk about the movie in the UK wasn't like, it was like, who's George Lucas? We haven't really heard of him, but we knew he was a friend of Steven Spielberg. So we kind of thought, well, this could be good, But then when we saw the trailers, we were like, what on earth is this? But we haven't got time now, but I'll tell you off camera about my first experience in watching the movie, which is kind of a little crazy. Anyway, okay, so then that's great. great to hear your memories of seeing Star Wars for the first time as a young man. So, kind of switching gears a little bit, I want to talk a little bit more about your work in special effects. What effect did working with special effects legends such as Dennis Muir and Jon Knoll have on your career? Can you tell us a little bit about working with them and what kind of experiences and insights they gave to you?
Oh yeah, Dennis Muir was one of the visual effects soups that I worked with quite often, and what I learned from Dennis was that having the real world as your reference is gonna push the film to its limits. And he was really not interested in looking at other films for other visual effects that have been done for reference or for inspiration. He was always asking to like, what's the reality? I remember at one point on what was it, Super 8, we had to have like the floor of a house have a big hole in it, and we were kind of looking at what was made and we were like going, well, how much construction is there in a floor? Wouldn't there be wires and plumbing or joists and stuff? We're not carpenters. And so he said, go find out, go to an actual construction site, take a look at the real thing. Don't try to guess. Don't try to look at another movie and say, well, in this movie, they did this. It's like, we don't want to do a carbon copy of a carbon copy. And so that kind of his philosophy. And he had an amazing eye for like the filing, making everything look real right at the very end. So like the last 10% was his domain. He was tweaking and pushing and pulling and just making everything look absolutely photoreal. So that's kind of the gift that I got from Dennis. And then who else were we talking about as well? Oh, Jon
Knoll. Yeah.
Yeah, I watched the ascension of Jon Knoll happen at ILM. And that was when digital was finally coming into visual effects in a big way. I mean, Photoshop had happened on Forrest Gump, and Jon was a big part of the Photoshop program. So that's great. Doug Chiang won an Oscar for it, for making the mouths move and say the words they want them to say in the film. But really the first time I remember Jon being part of, like in a major way, part of the ILM that was yet to come, the digital ILM, was we were in dailies for the Rocketeer. And it was all basically photochemical, the old way of doing things where everything was shot on film and like put through an optical printer so you could sandwich pieces of film together. And it was always a very tricky process that only a few people could do well with. And our regular dailies were over, and suddenly a whole bunch of young guys came in the theater, people I didn't recognize at all. And Jon was amongst them. And they sat on the ground underneath the screen and in front of all the senior people who did the photochemical work. And then they showed a bunch of flying shots of the Rocketeer flying through the crowds. And the one I remember distinctly was the one where the Rocketeer flies up into some clouds, and he's like, his rocket pack is failing. It's kind of going pop, 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 and he falls through the clouds. And then all of a sudden you see a burst of light. And it's like it's obviously his backpack's ignited, and he comes shooting up by the camera. And that was all done with digital compositing. And we had never seen anything digitally composited before. And so from that point forward, Jon was a major, major contributor at ILM. And it was really cool to see all that happening.
No, that's great. So I'm actually going to insert a question here that I was going to ask you a little later, but because we're on the same subject right now, it probably makes more sense because we'll get into the 1997 Star Wars Special Edition question in a second. So I managed to speak to Dennis very briefly one time, and I once asked him, I thought, if I ever met him, what question would I ask? So I asked him, Dennis Muir, and I said, what movie production that he'd worked on where he saw the biggest leap forward in special effects technology? And he kind of sat and pondered for a moment, and he said, Jurassic Park and T2. Those were the two biggest leap forward in special or visual effects technology. So I'm going to ask you the same question. In your career to date, what has been the moment or the production you've worked on where you've gone, wow, this technology has now gone way beyond where I thought it would actually go?
I think he answered the question correctly. I think Jurassic Park there's everything before it and everything after it. And if you had asked me way back before Jurassic Park if things would completely change from one way of doing visual effects to another, I would say no. Look, we've perfected. Look at Jedi. Look at like that shot where they've got 125, fighters all shooting right at the screen, and it's done immaculately. Like, why would you abandon that? They just kind of perfected this photochemical way of doing everything. And who would know that, like, within, I'd say, 2 years of Jurassic Park coming out, the entire way of doing visual effects would be completely different. All those machines that have been used through all the Star Wars movies would be mothballed, with the digital department would be growing leaps and bounds, hiring people, investing in infrastructure. And it was something that kind of had to happen overnight, because the demand for it was so high. And yeah, I remember hearing, like, while I was working in the model shop at that point at ILM Model Shop. Mm-hmm. And I remember hearing that they were going to make moving, breathing dinosaurs for Jurassic Park. And I kind of said, well, like, what do you mean? Like, we'll see them like way off behind a tree line, kind of looking around or something? Because, like T2 was like the closest thing you could look at that was a computer animated thing. Or was it the pseudopod from the Abyss? Anyway, there was nothing that was like flesh and blood that you saw right up close. So I was not convinced that computer graphics were ready for prime time yet. So I said to my coworkers, I said, you know what, when next time they have dailies for Jurassic Park and they announce it on a loudspeaker system, I'm going to run over there and stand in the back and just see what it looks like. And they were like, fine, you go do it. You go do you. And so the next time they called it, I went and stood in the back in the dark, and they had on the screen, it was real quiet in there, there was a Gallimimus running, and they had it on a turntable. So it was spinning and turning, and they showed it from the top. And you could see the rib cage swaying back and forth and pressing up on the skin, and the tail follow through, and all the motion blur. And my mouth kind of dropped open as staring at it. And I said, I think I said out loud, oh, fuck. Because I'm in the model shop, and this is so good. And so I went back to the model shop, and they said, what did it look like? And I said, it looked like National Geographic got in a time machine, went back, shot real dinosaurs, and brought back the footage. And they're like, no. And I'm like, you wait and see. And yeah, that movie delivered like no other. And it was like in one big sudden moment too. Mm-hmm. And what made it so great is the first time in the movie that you see dinosaurs, the characters are seeing dinosaurs for the first time too. So they're in the Jeep, and they get to see the brontosaurus, picking the leaves off the tree, and their mouths are hanging open, and they're taking their glasses off, and they can't believe what you're seeing, and they're crying, and you're sitting there going, I can't believe my eyes either. It's like the whole thing just sort of reinforces, like, we all get to see it for the first time together. It was so great.
Yeah, it must have been, as you describe it, very profound. You walk into, just kind of get a sneak peek or something, and you walk out thinking, our lives have changed just with this. This whole industry has just changed in minutes. How has that happened? So that's a great memory. And the third thing, he actually, when I said, asked him a question, he said, obviously, Jurassic Park T2, and he did say the Abyss. So you're correct. He said, I think the Abyss as well. So that's great. Thank you. So, right, let's get into the Star Wars special editions. It seems to be a focus, when people talk to you a lot about it. So we'll ask a few questions on that. So going back then to that time, how or when did you first learn that you would be working on the special editions, from 1997?
They were already like Star Wars. Basically, Star Wars was not a thing for a really long time at ILM. You could go upstairs and find boxes of stuff from Star Wars. You could find bits and pieces of C-3PO's original armor, the metal stuff, and like Jabba's eye from when they blew him up and stuff. And it was like boxes of junk, and nobody cared. And so it wasn't just Star Wars. This wasn't a thing. And then all of a sudden, George was announced that they were going to start pre-production on some prequels. And we kind of got excited. And all of a sudden, all those boxes of stuff gone up to the archives. There was like this major focus, like the mothership has landed. Star Wars is a big thing again. We're corralling the troops, and which was cool. But then in the midst of that, George decided he wanted to add some bits and pieces into the original 3 films. And that was the planning for all that was happening in the same department that was planning for the prequel films. So it was all up at Skywalker Ranch on the 3rd floor, all top secret. And we would get drawings every once in a while for little projects that were going to be coming up. And the first thing that came up was the Milas and the Ket wall. Or was actually just the Ket wall, to be honest, for the Cantina sequence. And I was one of the few creature makers in the shop at the time, still there doing something. It was a very quiet time. And they brought me the Terry Whitlatch drawing of the Ket wall and said, can you sculpt this real quick? This is sort of a quick insert shot. And and I said, oh, okay, great. Well, where in the film is it going to be? In the canteen? It's going to be in the canteen. I'm like, oh, okay, where in the canteen sequence? Because, I basically could play the whole sequence in my brain. And they said, well, that scene where like there's like a werewolf with red glowing eyes and he's got a cup and he's looking at the camera and he kind of goes, he kind of goes, Arr. I said, yeah, I love that guy. And they said, yeah, he wants to cut that out and put this character in its place. And I was like, no, you can't do that. That's sacrilege. But then I said, okay, I'll do it. But so yeah, that project came up. It was a real quick sculpt. It was like a 3-day sculpt, and then I molded it and cast it in rubber, and I was the guy with the hand up the head, and I painted and everything. So it's kind of a one-man band to a certain point until we got to stage, and then there was just so many things that had to happen with that puppet to make it do what it needed to do that we had a small crew around it, kind of making it from like the shoulders down, kind of holding it all together while we shot it on stage. What's funny though is like, I just stayed in the shop and I built the puppet, and they said, okay, can we take it over to the stage and set it up so we can get lighting going and we can get camera going? And I said, sure, yeah, let's take it over there. So we walked it over, this big blue head walking through the parking lot. And I walked into the stage and they had mocked up part of the cantina. And it was just a wall with this tiny little brick size like window that was glowing white. And it's so weird. Like my memory hit so hard. I was like, that is from Star Wars. It's such a simple thing. It's just a wall with a certain shaped hole in the wall. But even just that little bit, I went like, that is so cool. That is so the cantina.
Yeah. Taking you back.
Yeah. So just, and I think at that point when I put the creature up, because the creature's so weird and different, I put the creature up against that wall and I started to realize this is going to be in Star Wars. All right. Okay. Like I was kind of just not wrapping my head around, this is going to be in that movie that you saw as a kid. So how great is that? Like, okay, cool. And Jon Notman was the behind the camera. He was the visual effects soup for those shots. And so we referenced a lot of movies that we both thought were interesting, movies that we thought were how creatures can go wrong and things to avoid. And we shot 4 or 5 takes of that character looking around and interacting with the lighting a little bit. And then the Milas, Jon Notman happened to notice that the back of the character had something shape that looked kind of like a mouth on the backside of his head. Mm-hmm. He said, hey, can we just turn this puppet all the way around so the back is the front? And can you cover up the face with like a turban? And we could like get 2 creatures out of this, 2 for 1. And I was like, well, John, like I never really intended the back to be featured. So it's, not special in any way. And he was like, it's fine. So everyone scrambled. The costume department found the turban. Mark Siegel, who was working on, he's a good friend of mine and also one of the really talented artists from ILM. He went and made like this hookah that it could be smoking on out of just kit bashed it out of model pieces and painted it real quick and ran back over to the stage. And we put a Tygon tubing in it so smoke could be blowing out of it. And some guy, we needed to find someone who could smoke and had cigarettes on them. So they sat underneath it and were smoking and blowing in the tube. And yeah, it all kind of came together and like really quick, but it worked out.
Yeah. It's sometimes difficult to forget the basics. Like somebody who can smoke this thing is a consideration you probably just wouldn't, come straight to your mind. But so that's great. Thank you, Howie. So then moving into, special edition of Empire Strikes Back, and we wanted to talk about the Wampa, obviously. I affectionately call him Gory Wampa. So then how did you get involved in that particular, reproduction of the Wampa for the Empire Strikes Back?
Well, had just finished up the Ket Wall Milas shoot, and the next piece that they wanted to shoot was some insert shots for Empire of the Wampa. And what we were told is that George had to cut around the Wampa, that he never had the shots that he wanted for the scene, and that they wanted to show it in its full body. And we're going to have a big meeting about it. And so I said, I think this could be a guy in a suit. And there was a lot of talk about maybe doing it digitally, because digital was the new cool thing, but fur digital was very, very new. Like the lion in Jumanji was probably the best example of fur so far. It doesn't mean that they wouldn't have pulled it off perfectly, but there really wasn't a lot to look at. So I sculpted a little Wampa, maybe like about that big, and about as big as a G.I. Joe. And I did it over a like one of those wooden mannequins that you can pose that artists get. And I sort of glued it into a pose, and I sculpted with just water-based clay, like pottery clay, like the shape of the Wampa on half of it, on like the right half. And didn't have any time to paint it. I just put like baking powder on it to look like snow. And then I brought it to this meeting where George was going to come and talk to us all about what he wanted. And at the meeting, he sat at the end of the table, and he kind of said, what I was missing in this movie is this a moment where I startle the audience. Like, they haven't seen it yet, and I just wanted to give a sense of danger. Like, you can hear it, and I wanted the audience to like have this moment where they go, oh my gosh, Luke's in trouble. This thing is gonna eat him alive. And so that's it. That's just, he's wanted a startling moment. And so there was some talk of digital, and I said, well, everyone's looked at me like, who are you, buddy, from the model shop guy? And I said, it could be a guy in a suit. We could make the cave small so he looks bigger, and the proportions for a guy are okay, and we wouldn't have to put him on stilts, which is one of the big problems we had last time, where he couldn't really move around very easily. And I pushed this silly looking thing that I had built onto the table, and there was this sort of moment of like pregnant pause, silence, and George went, all right, we can do it as a guy in a suit. And I was like, yes, guy in a suit, awesome. And so after that I became the creature shop supervisor. It's a pretty esteemed title for like me and three guys. And we started building the suit. And I think Gorillas in the Mist had come out fairly recently, and we were all enamored with Rick Baker's like suits, the amazing suits where like muscles could slide over muscles, all that kind of stuff. And we wanted to do something cool like that. So our crew built these foam suits over a body cast of me, so that as it moved around, you could kind of get a sense that it had muscles that were moving around and stuff. It was a very strange looking project for a very long time, because until you put fur on it, it looks like some kind of like mutant monkey thing. And so I actually, just to make sure everybody knew it was going to be okay, I took a head casting of the Wampa, which, like I said, looked like kind of like a monkey. And I put all the white fur on it and all the icicles and blood and everything, the big horns. And I had that off to the side. So when production and supervisors would come over, they'd look at what we were doing and they go, okay, wow. So what are your next steps? What's left to go? And I'd say, well, that's what it's going to look like over there. And I point to the head and they go, oh, okay. All right. Yeah, it's going to look great. I'm like, yeah, it's going to look great. Just give us some time to like put it all together. So ultimately, the way it worked out for me being the guy in the suit, that wasn't a foregone conclusion at all, is we were at a point where we had a suit that was kind of built, and we needed to start doing test fittings. And so I saw Dennis Muir in the hallways, and I said, hey, Dennis, so I guess what we're going to have to do pretty soon here is go to a casting agent, I guess, and hire an actor and pay for him to fly up, and all those things. And like, I don't know how much access we can get, but we're going to need regular suit fittings to make sure this thing is going to work. I said, or I could do it.
I knew you were going to say that. Why not, right? Why not?
And
If you're
so
making
he
it,
knew what he
you
was
know
being
the costume.
And so he just kind of looked at me and went like, okay, Howie, you can do it. I was like, yeah, all right, awesome. So, you know, I knew from talking to other people that had done like monster suit work that it's like a little mini torture chamber of like just being sweaty and like low oxygen and all that stuff the whole time. But I thought, you know, if ever there was a reason to say yes to doing creature suit stuff, this is it. You know, the Wampa from Empire, just being in Empire. That's so cool. So that's how I got to be in the suit.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's a great opportunity for you to just say, I can do it. I've made it. I know how this works. And so selling yourself.
Like, it's going to be a hassle. It's going to cost a lot of money.
Selling yourself, and then you probably regret it if it's hot and sweaty and horrible. Do you know one thing that I think would be great for you to know? Misty Rosas, you know, the actor that played Queel and the Frog Lady in Mandalorian. You know, she said it sounds glamorous, but it's sometimes really horrible work. It's just sweaty and constricting, and you get some kind of like you can't hear anything, you can't see anything, and you know, if you have a phobia for enclosed spaces, it's not the work for you. So she talked about it, you know, being wonderful, but sometimes it's really hard. It's very, very difficult to do. And was that your experience then, you know, with the work in the suit then? Did you find it, you know, very difficult to do, or did you just take to it naturally?
They made the suit for me, so it fit great. The head, when you put it on, was built over a construction worker's helmet. So it had a knob on the back, and you could put the head on and then crank the knob, and like the band on the helmet would get tighter and tighter around your head. So you'd hear it going click, 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 click. How's that, Howie? I'm pretty tight. And they go click, click. I'm like, how's that? It's really tight. Like, okay. And then in the head had kind of a hood which would snap into the body, and then they would kind of blend the fur together. So when you were in there, you were really in there. It wasn't like you could just pop the head off real quick. You know, you had to ask people to help you to get it off. And it had a kind of a mandible that aligned with my mandible. So as I was opening my mouth, the mouth would open, but it would open like maybe 1.5 inches, 2 inches. It wasn't a huge open, but I could do that. And there was like little brow parts that were cable controlled by people off screen, so they could move these brows around. So I had a fair amount of facial expression, but like you were saying, I was looking through little tiny holes in the mask. There were no eyes in the mask. If they had shined lights like right into my eyes, they would have seen me in the mask, but it was just dark. So there were no spheres or anything there. But it was just like, yeah, like looking through two little dots. And like you said, you couldn't really hear very well. And the mouth was open to my mouth, so I could breathe. But the accumulated heat, because we were shooting midsummer, of course, where it was already like 90 degrees. And they brought in tons of extra lights because they really wanted everything to be in super sharp focus, because they were faking the depth of field. So everything had to be in super sharp focus, which meant a lot of lights. And these lights were called the walls of fire.
Oh, California, the summer with lights.
Yeah, it was pretty intense. And I don't know, it was probably 100 degrees or maybe a little more on set. And once you've been in that suit, which doesn't breathe at all, for, you know, maybe, you know, a half an hour, 45 minutes, you just know you're just covered in sweat from head to toe. You kind of don't care because you're about to roll, you're about to capture all this on film, and it's totally worth it. So Dave Carson was the director for the sequence. He was on set taking light meter readings. He was actually on set dressing the set with snow and things like that. I was off to the like center right of the shot. My team was all, you know, had their controllers and everything ready to go. And I heard Dave say, okay, let's do one. Let's see what one looks like. Let's do a shot. And are you guys ready? And we all went like, you know, yeah, we're ready to go. And then nothing happened. And there was no action. There was no nothing. And finally somebody came up and said, Howie, you can relax. George just showed up. And so I was like, oh, okay. All right. So they're going over everything with George. And from that point on, George just took over. He was the director for that shots, for all those shots. He actually sat on the camera. He was looking through the camera He was walking onto set, pointing at things, and then he said, "Okay, let's go, let's shoot it." And so I was like, "This is so cool that he's actually the man on set. He's shooting this." So my idea for this character was that he's like this mighty. I'm going back to Ray Harryhausen, like the Cyclops, maybe this big, powerful character with all of these very exaggerated kind of, theatrical movements. And so I was like in my mind, like, okay, I'm going to look powerful. I'm going to look strong. And I had my arms bowed and I was stomping around. And I heard George yell, "Cut." And he walked onto the set and he walked right like an inch from my face. And he said, "Can you hear me?" And I did. I was like, "Of course I can hear you." But I didn't want to say anything to embarrass him. So I said, I just kind of went,
"Yeah."
And he said, "Okay." He said, "Okay. I don't know what that was. But what I want you to do is I want you to be a bear, a big, dumb bear. Dumb, dumb, dumb. And when you're eating, all you can think of is one thought, like, I'm eating. And then you hear something that distracts you and you think, what's that? And then you remember, oh, I was eating, and you go back to eating. So just a big, dumb bear." And so he said, "Can you do that?" And I just said, "No, yes, I can do that, sir." And so we did the next take. And the direction I would get from him each time I would do it is we just kind of let the film roll, and we kind of do it over and over again. And he would say, "Slower, dumber." And so I would, like, by half, like, slow down and look over my shoulder. And then I'd go back to my bone, and then I'd hear, "Slower, dumber." So I was almost like underwater. Like, that's how slow I was moving. And in the meantime, my suit temperature was like getting higher and higher and higher. And we were just rolling and rolling, take after take after take. And my heart rate was like, I could feel my heart in my chest pounding. Like, I'd never felt that before, and in my ears pounding. So I was like, I don't think this is how a healthy sign. And so I just kind of stood up at one point and I went like, "Nope, nope, nope, we're done. I can't do anymore. We need to break." And so I heard, "That's great. We got that." And they hooked me up with some air. There was an air tube in my leg that they could hook up compressed air and get air in the suit. And it would bring my temperature down right away. So that was great. But I told one of the guys, I said, "Get my head off, get the head off. I want to just say thanks to George." And so they unsnapped it as fast as they could. They cranked it as fast as they could. They pulled it off. I was a sweaty mess in there, just in time for me to see the stage door kind of go closing and the back of his feet bleeding. Like, clunk. It's like, didn't make that connection. Oh, well.
But what a great memory, sometimes it's an AD or whatever, but for George to do it in person, that must have been just unbelievable, memories for you. And it's funny, his line has always been faster and more intense rather than slower and dumber.
I get that one.
Yeah.
We shot the arm cut, having been cut off as a separate insert shot. Mm-hmm. And we had built the suit so that I could you could take that arm off. I could slip my arm into the backside of the suit, and they had this plug that would go up to look like seared flesh. And then they had these spray bottles full of AB smoke. So you'd spray one and then you'd spray the other, and it would cause a chemical reaction that looked like smoke. So they would spray that on my stump just before we shot. And that would give it that effect that, like, the lightsaber had just cut off the arm. And what we wanted in that shot, though, was to give a sense of the pain, that the cut had just happened. So they kept asking me to open my mouth wider, like, scream like you just got your arm cut off. And I would open my mouth as big as I could, but the Wampa's mouth would only open like a little bit. And so they're like, "Can you do anything? Can you open it any bigger?" And so I took my arm that was behind my back and I moved it to the front, and I snaked it up through the neck, and I got my hand on the mandible, and they said, "Okay, rolling." And I just yanked down on it. I pushed my head back and yanked down on it, and it really opened huge. But there were all these rubber bands and stuff in there holding it all together, and I heard them all go, "Ping, ping, 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 ping." They all broke. And somebody said, "That's great, we got it." And I was like, "Well, it's a good thing you got it, because I think I just broke the mask."
I remember that movement just as you're doing it. I can remember that sequence. So
Yeah.
that's wonderful. So move on for another question. I really want to jump into Phantom Menace and Revenge of the Sith in the moment, because that part of your work is very important too. So thinking about where, your contemporaries, like I say, Rick Baker, Neil Scanlon, looking back from where we are now, what do you think about the original creature constructions, by icons such as Stuart Freeborn, Phil Tippett? Do you kind of look back and think, how on earth did they do that with such limited technology? Or do you look back and go, kind of looks fake?
I used to do that work. I built puppets for a really long time. And when I went to ILM, it was on Inner Space, and it was because I was a creature guy. And I helped them build interior sets of the human body, which were all organic and made of rubber and things like that. So I have a fondness for practical effects. Even though, I'm a trader and I went over to become a digital artist, because I thought that was definitely a big part of the future, and I wanted to be part of that. I feel like those, a lot of those effects are still really inspirational for me personally. I worked for Rick a real short on Captain EO. I don't know if you remember Captain EO. Yep. On those sort of fuzzball character that sits on Michael Jackson's shoulder.
I remember.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of his. I think someday I have to apologize for making something that erased the werewolf from the cantina. And I go back and look. Unlike digital effects and digital creatures, I go back and look at the stuff that was built in the 80s and 90s for inspiration more than I do anything that was done digitally for creature work. Maybe with Jurassic Park as like a touchstone where they got it really right. But all that work, there's so much artistry, so much amazing work in all those 80s and 90s creature films. I just think they're fantastic. I mean, look at Predator. People still go back and look at Predator like, that holds up. Yeah. Alien holds up. Aliens holds up. There's so much great work out there.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I feel about it,
Yeah.
And honestly, I think if digital had never come along, just say it was a technology that was delayed by 20 years or something for film, I think motion control for puppets would have pushed puppets to another level. I think it would have integrated into puppetry, and we probably would have seen much bigger, wider shots of things, and we would have seen a lot more control and a lot more finesse going into a lot of these creatures. So that's my feeling. That's my personal feeling. People will argue that there wasn't that much growth, but I disagree. I think the work holds up amazingly well, and I think this is like for my creature friends out there, that back in the 80s and 90s, the crew, when you were on location with your creature puppets and things, they took a lot of great care, because that's all there was. If you didn't get it in the camera, you were not going to have a monster in your movie. So they did whatever they needed to do. They would build a set upside down, like for The Thing, and have a special crew just to get a few shots of it like that. But those days are gone. You bring a rubber monster onto a set, and you're relegated to the B camera crew, and you get what you get. And they say, we'll replace what we need to with digital. So it's just a different world out there, because they have alternatives. But back in the day, they got amazing stuff because they had to.
Yeah, that's a great insight. Thank you, Howie. So, as I said a minute ago, I kind of want to focus just for a few minutes on your work with Phantom Menace, Revenge of the Sith. So in that period of your career with ILM, you were working in digital model development. Could you talk a little bit more about what you worked on for both Phantom Menace and Revenge of the Sith? A lot of people know, obviously, the Wampa and various things, but Phantom Menace and Revenge of the Sith, what was your specific kind of focus of work for those two productions?
On the Phantom Menace was like an embarrassment of riches for the model team, because there was probably 300 assets. All of them were hero. All of them were really cool. All of them were amazing, designed by Doug Chang and his team. And we would get this pile of work that we were going to do. So as soon as you finished one cool thing, they'd hand you a picture of another really cool thing, all equally great. So it's very rare to have that kind of a experience on a movie where there's that volume of stuff to work on. So the pod race sequence came up very early on, And we were really jacked, like in the model shop, like, look at this. There's like jet engines pulling a tiny little sled. What a great idea. This is going to be so awesome. And then there were creatures, in piloting the sleds. So I started by modeling the team tow pod, the what were some of the other ones? Mechanics pod, and just like creating the basic engine components and skid components and kind of getting those approved. But in the meantime, the model shop was building model versions of these. So they had taken over another gigantic stage and put tables in there, work tables. And I never bothered to go over and see what they were doing until I was basically pretty far along with my CG models. And finally, some friends said, you should come and look at this. We're pretty far along. And I went, okay. So I walked over and I just saw the level of detail that they had put into these model shop models of the same thing. And I went back and I told our team, I said, guys, you got to go visit the stage. I think we have to raise the bar quite considerably higher, because these things are bristling with detail, especially any exposed engine parts, any of that. They went crazy. And, at that time, nobody had done anything like that. We were getting an animatic from George, which for all the pod racers crashing was footage of like auto racers, cars flipping and shredding, or airplanes, like landing on the ground and like just disintegrating. And they're like, and I said, like, how are we going to do that in the model and digitally? And they said, yeah. And I said, like, we've never done anything like that before. No one's ever seen anything like with all those parts and all those pieces disintegrating. I'm like, well, we better figure it out. So that was a focus. The pod race was a focus for probably 3 months or so, just building all of those components. Then I kind of switched over to the Kolos sea creature, which was the first thing that attacks the little sub that's underwater that has Jar Jar and Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan in it. And that was kind of an alligator slug kind of monster. So that was really interesting to do. There's always a bigger fish moment in the film. It was kind of interesting on that one. Like, it was not a bioluminescent character until much later. They kind of decided the spines glow. And I was like, oh, cool. Okay. That'll show up, because it's so dark and such a deep sea moment. Adding that glow was really a big deal. But it really had to hold up, because I think there's a moment where the face of this character fills the entire screen as it's like getting ready to bite down on the submarine. And then what was it from there? I probably worked on a dozen other characters. I get the Jedi, the final one, a little mixed up in my mind, but those are the main ones that I recall working on.
And then Revenge of the Sith.
Revenge of the Sith. There was the attack onto Kyoshik, and there were all the Wookiee technology kind of catamaran looking vehicles, and the idea was that these were everything was based off of musical instruments. So the catamarans kind of had a saxophone kind of look to them. So there was like a lot of like bent pipes and things like that in there that were all going to be kind of chromy looking, but they were inside kind of like shells that were made of more natural materials. So I got put on most of those. There's a scene where Yoda gets into kind of an egg-shaped pod and flies away. And I needed to build that. Going back to the first one as well, the Phantom Menace, there's the scene where you're in the Imperial Senate and there's all those floating kind of egg-shaped
discs
that everyone's are in. So I built the one that you see, like where they're, judging everybody and, that kind of thing. There's also these like floating cameras that are in the movie all over the place. They're kind of like a disc with like a yellow with a disc with a lens kind of floating around. And I built that as well.
Oh, that's wonderful. We have some of our member questions coming up in a few minutes' time to wrap up a conversation. But I just want to ask one general question, right, that I like to ask everybody. And I know it's very, very difficult because you've had a wonderful career, you've done a lot of amazing things. But can you tell us a little bit about maybe your favorite memory or a favorite time that you've worked on a movie or television production? You know, what was it and what happened? Just something kind of random.
For Jurassic Park: The Lost World, there was this mobile lab that played a part in the film that the characters are in when it gets pushed over a cliff by two T-Rexes. And
I think that vehicle's at it's at one of the studios in LA.
Oh, is it still part of a tour?
Yeah, it's on the backlot tour, I think, of one of those.
There's 3 of them. And so what they wanted me to do was go down to Universal and take like blueprint quality photographs of this thing and then make it. And it was like my first job in the computer graphics department. So, you know, of course I was excited to go do that. And I went down to the Universal lot and walked onto the big stages. Dennis was with us. It was just like his team kind of coming to visit the set. And there was Spielberg in a raincoat, and they had rain machines everywhere. And it was real kind of dark. And they had the full mobile lab there and like a faked cliff and like this machinery to lift it up and everything. And we walked up to Spielberg and he said, I just came up with this great idea. What's going to happen is the mobile lab is going to kind of start to go over, but it's not going to just go over right away. We're going to have this tug of war where they're trying to keep it from going over the edge. And so the back end is going to be coming up, but then coming back down. And we're going to have one of the Mercedes SUVs pulling on it. And I looked over at the effects guys and they were like, yeah, he just told us he wants to do this. And, and they were like, oh, wow, cool. Well, that's really neat. And I went up on this. I went up to the rafters, you know, on this stage, and I took like down views of everything. And it was just neat to actually be there with Spielberg, you know, kind of directing everybody and seeing him interacting with ILM and talking about how we were going to, you know, stitch the sequence together with digital and with what they were shooting on set and what they could do and what they couldn't do, smart decisions, you know, from both sides. So it was really, you know, kind of neat to see an icon talking to another icon about these things and seeing their creative process and just being able to be there and kind of, you know, have my little mission, my submission inside of their big meetup. And I recall I went outside the stages and the tours for Hollywood's, you know, for the Universal Studios were going by. So I'd hear them go by like every 8 or 10 minutes. And I'd hear, you know, and on soundstage 4, that's where they shot Apollo 13. Next will be, you know, and people would wave at me and I'd wave back and I'd go, man, I remember as a little kid being on those trams. So here I am, like working on a studio lot, like waving to the tram. That's pretty cool moment.
Yeah, that's a cool memory. Yeah, and obviously, to be in the to be in the company of greatness like that and hear their ideas and thoughts. You know, I've heard a lot about Spielberg like that, and just the way that he carries himself and the way that he provides direction is just very unique in his style. So. Okay, great memory. Thank you, Howie. So what we're going to do now is go into a quick segment of questions and answers from our member group, because, you know, I've had the privilege and the honor of getting to know you and talk to you, but I'd really like some of our members to ask you some questions. So can we put up the first question from our member group for Howie?
Cool.
Okay. So this is from Dan in Seattle. I'll read it out. Hi, Dan. Thanks for your question. He says, hello there. As a collector of Star Wars actor create autographs, I sometimes find it difficult to identify all of the characters that a specific performer has assisted with. Is that a question or a statement?
Well, you know, I will sometimes wonder like how people do their research and figure out who has done what. I mean, there are certain people who frequent cons, and so you can see who's going to be there and they can see what they played because they're very aware of what they played. But I know that the internet is really organized now, like people share, this is what I sent, this is how long it took, this is what I got back, or this is the new updated contact information, so there's people that make spreadsheets on all this stuff. So yeah, I would say, go to your homies and see if anyone has those kinds of spreadsheets to share.
Yeah. So sorry, that's the last part of the question. Can you give us a list of Star Wars characters that you've assisted with creating or performing?
Oh, okay. All right. Okay.
Well,
that is a question. I worked on Mr. Gentle from Men in Black. That's the one where the face opens up and there's a little alien inside. I worked on, let's see, obviously the Wampa from Empire. I was Vigo the Carpathian in Ghostbusters 2. So I'm the guy in the makeup after Dan Aykroyd is like haunted and at the museum, and he turns and suddenly now he's a creature character. That was me. And then there's other things that I have done that I kind of like to talk about. It's not being inside the character, but I modeled and pretty much just basically by myself the Hulkbuster from Age of Ultron. So that was kind of a big digital moment for me.
Great. Okay, let's have another question from our member base. This is from Sherry in Ohio. Hi, Sherry. Hope you're doing good. I have heard lots of pranks happening during production on the special editions. Do you have any stories of ones where you were either the prankster or rather on the receiving end of one?
Well, at the ILM model shop, I was sort of known as being a prankster. So I was always just for fun and giggles, And at one point, I was at some market and they had these freeze-dried like fish, and they look like little transparent, like bell pepper looking skeletons. You get them in a little cellophane packet. So I bought those. I came in early and I put them all over the shop, like in everyone's tool chest and underneath a napkin or wherever. And they're kind of scary. Like you'd see it and you go like, oh my God, what is that? And then you'd pick it up and go, what is this? And so everyone had one of those on their desk, and I put one on my desk. So I would also be a victim and they wouldn't think of me. And eventually they figured out it was me, and I became known as the Fish Fairy. So I accepted the name. It was worth it. But later, when we were working on the Wampa character, I told you we had this head that you had to be cranked on. Well, some execs wanted to come see the whole thing all together. They wanted to walk over to our shop and like have me just, do a demo, show the whole thing all together. So I said, okay, guys, let's just do this real quick. Let's just, get the costume on, get the head on. They'll be here in like 10 minutes. And so when they put the head on me and started cranking it down, this overwhelming fish smell was like shooting up into my nostrils. And I said, what the hell is that? And they had put the line to the inside of the jaw was sardines, like right out of a can, super stinky, pungent. And I was like, take the head off. And then the executives walked in. So I had to just stay with it and like do my Wampa moves and have them stand around. All I could see was shiny shoes on the ground. And I heard them say, oh, okay, yeah, okay, looks good. And then they kind of walked off. And as soon as they walked out of the room, everybody burst into laughter because they knew I was in there suffering. And I probably deserved it, but man, was that stinky. It was super stinky.
That's a great story. It reminds me, I'll tell you one that I'm aware of. So during the original Empire Strikes Back, Stuart Freeborn's team were at Elstree, and, very long hours, long days. And a lot of the apprentices who were in the model shop were kind of nagging, can I work on this? And can I work on that? And can I help with this? And can I help with that? And one of Stuart Freeborn's team, who shall remain nameless, but he's told me this in person, actually, on a speaker series. He said, we got so fed up with this one apprentice nagging us. It's endlessly about doing some work. We nailed his feet to the floor. We nailed his shoes to the floor, to be precise, not his feet. And literally, as you just said, minutes later, in walks Gary Kurtz. And he's just staring at this guy stood in the middle of the floor going, what's wrong with you? So they didn't have the heart to say that they had his shoes nailed to the floor, but it's true. They played a prank on him and nailed his shoes to the floor, not realizing Gary Kurtz was about to walk in and say, how's things going? That's a true story.
That's great.
Okay, next question from one of our members. This is from Dave in North Carolina. Hey, Dave. I think Dave's at MegaCon today. Talk about how you were able to make Gizmo multiply in Gremlins. I'm sure it wasn't water.
There was a special puppet that had bladders in its back that would kind of like do this pulsing thing. And then there were little sculptures of what a gremlin would look like if it was all balled up. They were really cool. Actually, I've never really seen one out in the wild. I wonder if it still exists anywhere, but it's like if you took a gremlin and you like had him curl into a fetal position, but it made a perfect ball and you could see the ears. It was really finely sculpted. I think Randy Dutra sculpted it. And we had baskets of these things that we could kind of shoot all over the set. So we had like little air guns that would make them going boop, 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 boop. And I remember we had so many molds in our mold shop of these. Anytime there was a little bit of extra casting material, the order was just pour it into these molds and make as many of these things as you possibly can in the time that we've got. So it was like, okay, they were all, every time you swept up, you'd sweep up like 4 or 5 of these things. They were just everywhere.
Wow, great. Great insight again. Okay, another question from our member base. This is from Chris in California. Hi, Chris. What combination of the Hulkbuster was practical and CGI in the film when it was in use?
The Hulkbuster, they actually, the Legacy Effects built a full-size Hulkbuster that was on set. Or no, I wouldn't say full-size. It was probably 4 feet tall, and it was just from the waist up. And it was there for lighting reference, so we could take lots of photographs of it. And when we did the digital one, if there was ever a question of like the reflective quality of the suit and what would that really look like in real life, we had this hard example that we could follow. And it's really valuable to have something like that when you get into the digital world, because otherwise you're just guessing. You don't have a real example of what it would really look like. So ultimately, in the end, the Hulkbuster on screen is 100% digital. There's no like insert of a hand or like a shot of the what's his name in there, the actor, Tony Stark. Yeah, he's in a black abyss being composited in, and yeah, even the rocket that flies around overhead and provides backup parts for the Hulkbuster as he's fighting, that was all digital as well. So the whole thing, basically. And it was about a 3.5 month model build for me.
Goodness, that's great. Okay, couple more questions. Who's
Robert Downey?
Next week? That's it.
Sorry,
I
Robert.
blanked as well. I blanked, yeah. Okay, this is from April. Hello, April. Hope you're doing good. She's from North Carolina. What was your favorite effect you worked on for the Pirates movies?
Oh, I was given an option. Like I asked, I said, what characters could I be given on the first Pirates movie? And they said, you can have the skeletonized, cursed Jack Sparrow, or you can have the cursed monkey.
Ooh.
I really thought about it for a while because there was lots of footage of the monkey and he was really cute. And ultimately, I'm like, oh, I'd be a dummy to not say Jack Sparrow. So I said, I'll take the Jack Sparrow, and somebody else unfortunately did the monkey. So yeah, that process, it was kind of fun. It was basically taking a life scan of Johnny Depp and sculpting it down to its kind of skeletonized form. And then I kind of sculpted so that the texture artists, the guys that paint the thing, could add a lot of their detail to it. So I wouldn't have to make a model that was like super, super heavy and dense. They could pick up a lot of that with the textures. And I remember Steve Walton, who was the painter on that Jack Sparrow, he had a barbecue and he brought all the leftover mangled barbecue bones to work and put them on a scanner and scanned them all. And that's what ended up being the textures for Johnny Depp's face.
That's crazy. That's crazy. Oh, I'm glad that April asked that question because she knows my favorite movies are the Pirates. My favorite line is, "We named the monkey Jack." That's incredible. Again, an insight that people like me who don't work in your industry never get to hear about. So that's special. Thanks for that. Okay, next question. This is from Spencer. What character effect was particularly difficult to do but most rewarding? That's a great question, Spencer.
Yeah. I think believe it or not, it was the Crystal Skull from Crystal Skull. I made the actual like digital one, and there were 3 of the practical ones brought to my desk in special made cases. And I opened them up, and they were really, each one was really different. And it was, I think they were all 3 were made just so they could shoot them and see what they looked like. And I was not told which one was the final version, but they were all cast in clear material. And one was stuffed with, it's like this pearlescent reflective saran wrap that is like reflects green and pink and all these colors. And it was all this crumpled stuff that was put inside one of the skulls. So for me, like trying to see the surface of the skull was particularly hard because they're all clear and they're all full of like reflective materials and stuff. So it was a painstaking process to, get all the crenellations and of this bone and everything looking just right. And then for it to appear in the end of the film where these aliens are being kind of whipped up. I made the alien as well, which I think we called Frank. And that was really rewarding. It's the climax of the movie, and the name of the movie, it's the Crystal Skull from Crystal Skull. So that was really rewarding.
It's funny. I remember we were talking to Hal Hickel, Hal, and sometimes he's saying the things that you would not think would be difficult typically are, and vice versa. So it's very, very interesting. Okay, I think we're down to our last 3 questions, Howie, if you're okay with that.
Yeah.
Next question for Howie. This is from Matt in Florida. Hi, Matt. Do you have any funny stories from playing Demon Vigo in Ghostbusters 2? The only person to have played a possessed Dan Aykroyd.
It was another one of those situations where I couldn't hear, I couldn't see. They put full contact scleral lenses in my eyes, which are glass and with a little pinhole so you can see through them. And at the time, they didn't have flexible contact lenses back then. They just had the glass ones. And I was told, I was working in the model shop. I already knew I was going to be the Vigo character. And somebody walked up and said, "Hey, you got to go outside and get in a cab and fly down to LA." And I said, "When is that going to happen?" And they said, "Right now." And I was like, "Now?" I'm just like, "Now?" They're like, "Yeah, there's the cab. Go get in the cab." And I was like, "All right." So I get in the cab. The cab driver hands me a ticket for the airplane. I fly down to LA, and there's this eye doctor at the time who would work with visual effects companies and make these very scary kind of contact lenses that were all glass. Dr. Green, Spoon or Span, I can't remember. I always get confused. But he was a doctor that worked with little kids. So when it came to adults, he had no patience for any problems that you had because he had to work with kids, So I remember he did this casting of my eyeballs. So I don't know if you know what alginated. It's like Jell-O that you can put on your skin, and when it congeals, you can peel it off, and then you can make a positive casting with plaster, like a reproduce your face, using that as like a mold material. So what they did was they injected alginate into my eyes. They pulled my eyelids open, snapped them over a cup that had a tube, mixed up the alginate into a syringe, and just connected it to the tube and pushed, and it just made the alginate go right onto my surface of my eye and then around my eye and back to the optic nerve. And the whole time the doctor is saying, "Look here, look here." And I would be like, and he was holding a cup, and I could see there was like some alginate dust in the cup. And I'm like, "Did he mix that stuff okay?" And I heard him say, "Did I say move your eye? No, look at my finger." So I was like, "Oh, shoot, man, he's mean." So, or strict anyway. And so the stuff congeals, and then he's got to wiggle it off your eye. And so he grabbed it and started like moving it around to kind of loosen it up. And then he pulled, and I could feel like my eye being pulled on the optic nerve. And it's a sensation, a unique sensation. I can still remember it very clearly. And then it just kind of pops out, and the other one Normally they don't do 2 in one day because you're kind of, your eyes just watering and kind of reacting to something. So like, you know how it is when you get like a lash on your eye. Imagine like injecting stuff all over your whole eye. So your eye is just freaking out. And they did both eyes at the same time. So because we were in a hurry, and I left with Kleenex jammed into my sunglasses because I was just, my eyes were just tearing down. But yeah, that's how those were made.
Goodness. And I bet he said, see, you're fine. Nothing wrong with you.
You're fine, get out.
That's a great story. Okay, I think we've got 2 more questions. Next one. So this is Chris in California. How long did it take to build the Wampa?
It was about 2 months or so, from the very first like life casting, generating that with pieces that could come apart like a mannequin, to being completely finished with it, with all the hairs in place. It can all snap together. All the mechanical parts are working. One of the last things we did to make the fur look cool, because we were up against a real difficult fur situation because it was such a big powder puff. So we had so much like mousse and gel and pomade combed into that hair to kind of give it some shape and like clump it and stuff. One of the last things we did was we melted paraffin, just like candle wax in a big double boiler. And then we would take brushes and just goop that stuff up into the white fur, wait for it to cool off, and then crush it with our hands. And it would look like dangling icicles. It was a really cool effect. Like he'd been out in the, like water had accumulated and icicles had accumulated in the fur. So that was like the last step. And that was a couple of months after we started.
Great story. Okay, I think this is the last question. So this is from John G. I don't know if you can answer that, but if you can tell us anything about what you're working on.
I'm up at Leica Animation in Portland, Oregon, and I'm the model lead there for a big production called Wildwood. There's been a little bit published about it already. You can look it up. It's a book as well, so you can kind of see what it says about that. But it's a really amazing, huge project that we have a ton of really talented artists working on right now. So if you're a fan of Leica films like Coraline, you're gonna love this.
Really looking forward to that. And as we just about come into Oscar season, I think talking to individuals like yourself, Howie, and your career and the work and the stories and the memories, when Oscar season come up, I'm always looking for special effects and who's been nominated, and any insight into that. Anybody you think that is going to, be up there in the next couple of years, winning a lot of accolades?
Oh, like in the future?
Yeah.
There's so many big productions happening right now. I noticed that there's a new Jurassic Park film coming out, which is a caper movie. So I'm super excited about that. And the effects look terrific. I think there's a He-Man Masters of the Universe movie happening, which is gigantic. So I think that's going to be a huge one to look out for. And yeah, I'm wondering if there'll be more Alien films. I think the latest one, which was Romulus, it got nominated this year. I think it's going to kick off more Alien franchise type movies. So looking forward to all of those.
Yeah, sounds great. Well, first of all, thank you so much for your generosity with your time, Howie, and certainly thank you also for giving such wonderful insights and memories and stories of your time and your career today. It's just been such a treat. And we kicked off the first edition of the speaker series last week, and we're just raising the bar every week now. So thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it, and it's been great to get to know you a lot more. And I'm sure our members and asking you questions have been thrilled with insights into your story to date.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Great questions. It was really fun talking to you guys.
Oh, great. That's wonderful. So just as we wrap up, today's episode. We do have another speaker series next week. We can't tell you who it's going to be, but it's going to be somebody exciting again. Hopefully somebody from across the pond, from good old England and London. So we'll look forward to that particular episode. And with that being said, thank you again, Howie, for your time. Thank you to all of members for your questions, and thank you for joining us for the Speaker Series Season 3. Thank you so much. And thank you again, Howie, and hopefully we'll speak to you again soon.
That'd be terrific. Thank you.